Good afternoon. Bienvenidos. I'm Tom Putnam, Director of the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, and on behalf of Tom McNaught, Executive Director of the Kennedy Library Foundation, and all of the sponsors who are listed in your program, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this ceremony, at which we present the L.L. Winship PEN New England Awards and the PEN Hemingway Award, America's best-known prize for a distinguished first book of fiction. As you know, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the presidency of John F. Kennedy, in which advancing American arts and culture played such a crucial role. Let's watch a brief video pairing JFK's words on the role of the artist with images from our time.
Robert Frost said it. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. I see little of more importance to the future of our country and our civilization than full recognition of the place of the artist.
We too will be remembered, not for victories or defeats in battle or in politics, but for our contribution to the human spirit.
If art is to nourish the roots of our culture, society must set the artist free to follow his vision wherever it takes him. We must never forget that art is not a form of propaganda, it is a form of truth.
For art is the great democrat, calling forth creative genius from every sector of society, disregarding race or religion or wealth or color.
Many of the lines we just heard came from a speech President Kennedy delivered at the dedication of the Robert Frost Library at Amherst College. JFK's words about Frost could have easily been applied to another author whom he admired, though never met, Ernest Hemingway. Allow me to read a brief excerpt. Our national strength matters, but the spirit which informs and controls our strength matters just as much. This was the special significance of Robert Frost. He brought an unsparing instinct for reality to bear on the platitudes and pieties of society. His sense of the human tragedy fortified him against self-deception and easy consolation. I have been, he wrote, one acquainted with the night. And because he knew the midnight as well as the high noon, because he understood the ideal as well as the triumph of the human spirit, he gave his age strength with which to overcome despair. At bottom, he held a deep faith in the spirit of man and the role of the artist in establishing the basic human truths which serve as the touchstone of our judgment. Hemingway returned JFK's affection. In fact, on display in our new exhibit on JFK's inauguration is the handwritten draft of the following cable. Watching the inauguration from Rochester, Hemingway wrote, there was happiness and the hope and the pride and how beautiful we thought Mrs. Kennedy was. Watching on the screen, I was sure our president could stand any of the heat to come as he had taken the cold of that day. Each day since, I've renewed my faith and tried to understand the practical difficulties of governing he must face as they arrive, and admire the true courage he brings as our president in times as tough as these are for our country and the world. Today we pay tribute to writers who, with their own fresh voices, are remaking American literature in this new century. But before doing so, let me recognize members of the Hemingway family, including Patrick, who's here with me on stage, his wife Carol, their grandson Robbie, and his father John Rothenberg, and Hemingway's grandson Sean, who has edited a number of Hemingway anthologies, and most recently the restored version of A Movable Feast. I also want to thank the individuals and organizations that make this annual award ceremony possible, the Hemingway Foundation and Society, which funds the PEN Award, represented here today by Steve Paul. Thanks also to the UCross Foundation, the University of Idaho, and PEN New England, including Helen Atwan, Richard Hoffman, and Karen Wolf, who we are honored to know and collaborate with on this award and other efforts to help promote arts and literature in this community and beyond. Among us are a number of past winners of the PEN Hemingway Award, including Edward P. Jones, one of this year's judges who will lead the PEN Hemingway Award ceremony. We're also honored to have members of the Winship family here with us, including Joanna Crawford, daughter of Lawrence Winship, for whom the award is named, and two of her grandchildren, including John Crawford, who will represent the Winship family when making the presentation to the winners of the L.L. Winship PEN New England Awards. Patrick and Carol Hemingway are the guiding force for the Hemingway collection. We're deeply indebted to them for their generosity and the care and direction they continue to offer to support us in our work. In introducing Patrick each year, it's hard for me to hide my great affection for him. In past introductions, I've noted animal references made by his father, at times comparing Patrick to a mouse, an otter, and the coyote, all of which I'm rejecting today in favor of the bull. We are in the process of acquiring a manuscript copy of Hemingway's short story, The Faithful Bull, which I reread recently. It begins, "Once there was a bull, and his name was not Ferdinand, and he cared nothing for flowers. He loved to fight, and he fought with all the other bulls of his own age or any age, and he was a champion. He was not a bully, nor was he wicked. Fighting was his obligation and his duty and his joy." At the story's inevitable end, even the matador admires the bull for his bravery and faithfulness, remarking to his sword handler as he exits the ring, "Que toro más bravo." Each time I'm with Patrick, I'm struck by his ebullience, his wit, and insatiable curiosity. A faithful son, he cares for Hemingway's literary legacy as a duty and a joy. And no one is a greater champion of the importance of literature in our lives. It is good to have such a friend in times as tough as these, for whom it might be said, "Que hombre más bravo." Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Patrick Hemingway.
Well, thank goodness I can retreat from that very, very kind words to reading the person who I really represent, rather than myself, I'd say. This passage that I've picked is really in honor of our winner of the award this year, who gives a wonderful portrait of an area in Los Angeles that where people of Mexican descent live and have lived, and where they've suffered a certain amount of setbacks due to the introduction of a baseball stadium. It's from The Gambler, the Nun, and the Radio, which was one of the short stories written when Hemingway was very interested in writing short stories and was at certainly the height of his powers in that medium. They brought them in around midnight, and then all night long, everyone along the corridor heard the Russian. "Where is he shot?" Mr. Fraser asked the night nurse. "In the thigh, I think." "What about the other one?" "Oh, he's going to die, I'm afraid." "Where is he shot?" "Twice in the abdomen. They only found one of the bullets. They were both beat workers, a Mexican and a Russian, and they were sitting drinking coffee in an all-night restaurant when someone came in the door and started shooting at the Mexican. The Russian crawled under a table and was hit, finally, by a stray shot fired at the Mexican as he lay on the floor with 2 bullets in his abdomen. That was what the paper said. The Mexican told the police he had no idea who shot him. He believed this to be an accident. An accident that he fired 8 shots at you and hit you twice? "Si, senor," said the Mexican, whose name was Cayetano Ruiz. "An accident that he hit me at all, the cabron." He said to the interpreter. "What does he say?" asked the detective sergeant, looking across the bed at the interpreter. "He says it was an accident." "Tell him to tell the truth, that he's going to die," the detective said. "No," said Cayetano, "but tell him that I feel very sick and would prefer not to talk so much." "He says that he is telling the truth," the interpreter said. Then, speaking confidentially to the detective, "He don't know who shot him. They shot him in the back." "Yes," said the detective, "I understand that, but why did the bullets all go in the front?" "Maybe he is spinning around," said the interpreter. "Listen," said the detective, shaking his finger almost at Cayetano's nose, which projected waxes yellow from his dead man's face, in which his eyes were alive as a hawk's. "I don't give a damn who shot you, but I've got to clear this thing up. Don't you want the man who shot you to be punished?" "Tell him that," he said to the interpreter. "He says to tell you who shot you." "Mandarlo a carajo," said Cayetano, who was very tired. "He says he never saw the fellow at all," the interpreter said. "I tell you straight, they shot him in the back." "Ask him who shot the Russian." "Poor Russian," said Cayetano. "He was on the floor with his head enveloped in his arms. He started to give cries when they shoot him, and he is giving cries ever since. Poor Russian. He says some fellow that he doesn't know, maybe the same fellow who shot him." "Listen," the detective said, "this isn't Chicago. You're not a gangster. You don't have to act like a moving picture. It's all right to tell who shot you. Anybody would tell who shot them. That's all right to do. Suppose you don't tell who he is and he shoots somebody else. Suppose he shoots a woman or a child. You can't let him get away with that. You tell him," he said to Mr. Fraser. "I don't trust that damn interpreter." "I am very reliable," the interpreter said. Cayetano looked at Mr. Fraser. "Listen, amigo," said Mr. Fraser, "the policeman says that we are not in Chicago, but in Haley, Montana. You are not a bandit, and this has nothing to do with the cinema." "I believe him," said Cayetano softly. "Ya lo creo. One can, without honor, denounce one's assailant. Everyone does it here," he says. He says, "What happens if after shooting you, this man shoots a woman or a child?" "I'm not married," Cayetano said. He says, "Any woman, any child." "The man is not crazy," Cayetano said. "He says you should denounce him," Mr. Fraser finished. "Thank you," Cayetano said. "You are of the great translators. I speak English but badly. I understand it all right. How did you break your leg?" "A fall off a horse." "What bad luck. I am very sorry. Does it hurt much?" "Not now. At first, yes." "Listen, amigo," Cayetano began. "I am very weak. You will pardon me. Also, I have much pain, enough pain. It is very possible that I die. Please get this policeman out of here before I am very tired." He made as though to roll to one side, then held himself still. "I told him everything exactly as you said, and he said to tell you truly that he doesn't know who shot him and that he is very weak and wishes you would question him later on," Mr. Fraser said. "He'll probably be dead later on." "That's quite possible. Then why? That's why I want to question him now." "Somebody shot him in the back, I tell you," the interpreter said. "Oh, for Christ's sake," the detective sergeant said, and put his notebook in his pocket. Outside in the corridor, the detective sergeant stood with the interpreter beside Mr. Fraser's wheelchair. "I suppose you think somebody shot him in the back, too?" "Yes," Fraser said. "Somebody shot him in the back. What's it to you?" "Oh, don't get sore," the sergeant said. "I wish I could talk spick." "Why don't you learn?" It's a much longer story, but...
The first citation I'll read is for "Death is Not an Option." Fresh, vibrant, and funny, the stories in "Death is Not an Option" jump off the page. Suzanne Rebecca has a tactile sense of humor. A stucco wall looks so much like meringue that one character feels, quote, the urge to put her tongue to it, unquote. Rebecca is a writer to watch. Her stories are good enough to eat. Vida's nine dazzling stories seduce the senses and bind the heart, casting a charged light on second-generation Latina experience and redefining America coming of age in Sabina's unforgettable voice. Patricia Engel is a master stylist whose relentless dance through language and flawless control rhythms never abandons story itself. She is an original, and Vida marks an astonishing debut. Brando Skyhorse's The Madonnas of Echo Park offers a splendid and graceful look at the lives of mostly working-class Mexican Americans in a section of Los Angeles. It is a grand and beguiling debut and a very worthy addition to the small body of literature that dares to offer a sensitive and moving portrait of another portion of humanity it is far too easy to overlook. Mr. Skyhorse is a generous writer, a caring writer, an observant writer, and these are among the first things we ask of chroniclers with heart and soul.
I wanted to hear the end of that bull story. This is the second time I've been here at the JFK Library. The first time was in the winter of 2000. I was an editorial assistant working at a small publishing house that specialized in fly fishing books and was sent here to do research for an anthology of Hemingway's writings on fishing. The press that I worked for had not many resources. My motel room was at a Days Inn, a good 30 to 40-minute bus ride away from here. And I ate nothing but granola bars, which, as you can see, I have skipped the diet now, to keep my expenses down. But my publisher insisted that I come here because he knew I wanted to be a writer, even though back then I was more dreamer than writer. Maybe the place will inspire you, he said. I never thought I'd have the opportunity to make a return trip here, and never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I'd come back as a published writer to receive such an extraordinary honor. I am deeply grateful to the Hemingway family for continuing to support new voices in literature, the Hemingway Foundation, the PEN Foundation, UCross, the University of Idaho, everyone at the JFK Library who showed a young editorial assistant such generous warmth 11 years ago, Patrick Hemingway and Sean Hemingway for both being here today, Edward P. Jones, Allegra Goodman, and Jane Ann Phillips for their time and commitment to reading so many deserving books, Martha Levin and Dominic Infuso at Free Press, my 11th grade history teacher, Howard Shore, who first convinced me that anything worth saying is worth writing down, and I cannot stress enough how important a teacher's role is in a young writer's development, and I feel that that's something that we need to hear today, now more than ever. My early readers who made the journey here, Daniel Maurer, Grace Toulousan, and Chris Hokinson, my agent Susan Gollum, My father, Frank Zamora, who flew all the way from Los Angeles to be here today. And most of all, I'd like to thank the woman of my life, Elena Sudeath, who kept the bright fires of my dreams from being extinguished. Elena, here is your acknowledgement. I could not have done this without you. Thank you. I'd like to read from two different points in the book, very briefly. The first part is from the point of view of a day laborer named Hector, and it's a father's lament about everything he has lost. We slipped into this country like thieves, onto the land that once was ours. Those who had never been here before could at last see the promised land in the darkness. Those who had been deported and come back, only a shadow of that promise. Before the sun rises on this famished desert, stretching from the fiercest undertow in the Pacific to the steepest flint-tipped crest in the San Gabriel Mountains, the temperature drops to an icy chill. The border disappears, and in a finger snap of a blink of an eye, we are running, carried on the breath of a morning frost into hot kitchens to cook your food, waltzing across miles of tile floor to clean your houses, settling like dew on shaggy front lawns to cut your grass. We run into this American dream with a determination to shed everything we know and love that weighs us down if we have any hope of survival. This is how we learn to navigate the terrain. I measure the land not by what I have, but by what I have lost, because the more you lose, the more American you can become. In the rolling jade valleys of Elysian Park, my family lost their home in Chavez Ravine to the cheers of gringos rooting for a baseball team they stole from another town. Down the hill in Echo Park, I lost my wife and the woman I left her for when I ran out of excuses and they ran out of forgiveness. Across town in Hollywood, I lost my job of 18 years when a restaurant that catered to fashion and fame found its last customers were those who had neither. And my daughters, they are both lost to me, somewhere in the blinding California sunshine. What I thought I could not lose was my place in this country. How can you lose something that never belonged to you? And now I'd like to read briefly just from the end of the book. The last chapter of this book involves Hector's daughter, Aurora, who is searching for her mother's dog in the neighborhood that she grew up in. The area, like the relationship with her mother, is a place she no longer recognizes. At the end of the book, she finds her dog in a place called Elysian Park, where back in the 1950s used to be Chavez Ravine, a neighborhood where Mexicans who couldn't buy houses anywhere else in the city were steered until the entire area was razed to make way to build Dodger Stadium. And it is here, on this land, with its history, where she learns exactly what she might have found. Elysian Park sits underneath Dodger Stadium, the former home of Chavez Ravine, and of Aurora Salazar, the last woman to be taken from the land that once was hers. Heading down Scott Avenue to Elysian Park Drive, my dog Blackjack and I walk amid verdant meadows, plump trees, picnic tables, and large patches of grass rolling around the hills in sea-green waves. We sidle up to a pickup baseball game and lie behind the backstop on a splintered bench. Blackjack's itching to chase the ball each time it's hit, but he stays by my side. A bright yellow frisbee sails over me as if suspended from strings, a lost UFO from one of those old black and white sci-fi movies I loved watching on Saturday mornings in my pajamas. Blackjack takes off and catches the wayward satellite before it slams into a steel drum trash can. Racing back, he leaps right past me and returns the frisbee to my mother. She walks over, holding the frisbee out to me. Our fingers interlace and lock in the exchange. She lets them linger there, then pulls the frisbee away. The whip snatch motion sends both of our hands upward, sailing the disc in a clear, uninterrupted trajectory. I watch Blackjack take off in haste as it soars high above the ground, where the ghost of Chavez Ravine walks side by side with the souls of the bereaved, through the sun-dappled leaves of the walnut trees, across the thickets of dusty chaparral, down a plain dirt road lined with Mexican fan palms, to an amaranthine valley of orange groves that bloom from here to the ocean, a land rich with roots that grow, thrive, burn, are raised, heal, then grow again, deeper and stronger than before. This is the land we dream of, the land that belongs to us again. I'm deeply grateful to you all. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Richard Hoffman, chair of PEN New England, and I'm here with John Crawford, who, along with his mother, Joanna Winship Crawford, and Peg Winship, represent the Winship family who instituted this award in memory of Tom Winship, longtime publisher of the Boston Globe and champion of New England writers. So I want to just take this opportunity to say thank you. This is my favorite day of the literary year. We gather in the warming sun, galoshes-less, unear-muffed, reinvigorated, to celebrate with the PEN New England L.L. Winship Awards the best writing to come from a region that remains the wellspring of American letters, and to honor 3 writers whose books have been selected by a panel of distinguished judges as the best works from among the many fine books published in the past year. This year's judges for the PEN New England L.L. Winship Award were Kurt Brown, author of 5 books of poems, most recently No Other Paradise; Alan Davis, author of 3 short story collections and long-standing editor of the annual series American Fiction; and Joe Macall, essayist, editor, and author of the books The Last Street Before Cleveland and Plain Secrets, An Outsider Among the Amish. As I announce the winners, please hold your applause until after I've read the citation. This year's winner in poetry is Charles Douthat for his collection Blue for Oceans. Kurt Brown writes, Charles Douthat's Blue for Oceans shapes and reclaims emotion as a poetic virtue at a time of postmodernist detachment and allows us to see the world not as we ordinarily see it, but as we experience it, through the lens of memory and the human heart. The quality of Douthat's poems lies in their restraint, their lived-in, lived-through undeniable authority. He knows that the power of the unsaid, the vast reservoir of emotion that builds up over a lifetime of experience, puts enormous pressure on every word. Most people try to write something called poetry. Charles Douthat is just writing it. And in fiction, the 2011 PEN New England L.L. Winship Award goes to Kermit Moyer for The Chester Chronicles. Alan Davis's citation reads, gorgeous and subtle, Moyer's are stories that stay with you. His characters are stripped down to the essential grit, surviving through patience and the ability to gauge complex layers of tradition and expectation. Love destroys, family redeems, especially on the top floors of high-rise apartments. This is simply great storytelling. Kermit. And the award in nonfiction goes to Gerald Walker for Street Shadows, a memoir of race, rebellion, and redemption. In a moment, Gerald will read from that exquisite book. According to Joe Macall, just when you think you've read every memoir on the shelves about a young person's journey out and up from the rubble of a troubled childhood to the frontier of a redemptive adulthood, along comes Gerald Walker's Street Shadows to remind us why we read in the first place. With honesty and lyricism, Walker drives the truth of being alive straight through our hearts. This book will stay with me as long as breath. Gerald.
On behalf of Charles Dodat and Kermit Moyer, I'd like to thank the Winship family and PEN New England and our families, our friends, and of course our literary agents. When Richard Hoffman asked me to give the reading, I asked how long it should be, and he said, well, it's up to you. This is your moment in the sun. Go for as long as you want. And I said, well, I have a standard reading that's about 30 minutes, maybe 45. And Richard said, that's fine. An hour? He said, sure, do what you want. You have the mic. Just run with it. But there's something you ought to know. The only thing standing between the audience and Marilyn Robinson is you. So that changed things a little bit. And when I last timed my reading, it's down to 4 minutes and 33 seconds. I'm as eager as anyone to hear Marilyn Robinson. I'm an extraordinary fan of her work. She's a genius, of course. And some of you know that I was a student of hers at the University of Iowa. And so she is as responsible as anyone for me standing before you today. The excerpt is from the first chapter called A Place Like This. The winos were already there, 4 middle-aged men wrapped in the coats of giants. I took my place among them. I removed my cigarettes from my pants pocket and distributed them to the fingers trembling toward me. We smoked in silence while responsible people hurried past, heading toward the elevated train station or to the stores that lined this strip of 35th Street. It was my day off from responsibility, I had decided. I had called in sick to my unit clerk job at the medical center. I wasn't sure I'd return. I wasn't sure of much of anything, only that I was out of Coke and it was important to be drunk until I got some more. The wino's radar clicked in and they moved toward the door seconds before it opened. The proprietor stepped back as we entered, saying good morning to some of us by name. He went behind the counter where 3 other men stood praising Michael Jordan's antics they'd seen on TV. All of the winos headed in that direction. They wanted Wild Irish Rose and Mad Dog, kept on the glass shelves above the register, but I had scrounged enough money for something better. Minutes later, I emerged from the store with a pint of cognac and a 40-ounce of Old English 800. A boy who couldn't have been more than 14 joined me. He asked me to help him buy some liquor. I told him no. I told him he should be in school. He laughed and said I should be in school. Years later, I would think back to that incident and wonder if the boy even existed, if he were merely my subconscious urging me toward the path of salvation. But I couldn't comprehend that then, had no way to recognize any latent desire to be saved. All I knew was that at 21, my life was a mess and couldn't get any worse. But things can always get worse. Sometime later that day, I woke on my couch to a ringing phone. It was my friend Greg bearing good news. He'd started working at a dope house near 47th and King Drive and asked if I wanted credit. I told him I'd be there as soon as I found a ride. I called my ex-girlfriend, Pam. "You fool," she hissed. "Do you know what the hell time it is?" I didn't, but she told me. It was close to midnight. I promised to get her high. "Give her 30 minutes," she responded, "maybe a bit longer because of the storm." I moved close to my window and saw that it was snowing, a full-scale blizzard, in fact, weightless flakes swirling in all directions. While I waited, I straightened up a bit, stuffing empty liquor bottles and canned goods into a large garbage bag. For the first time in 2 days, I showered and brushed my teeth. I still had a little of the cognac left, but I was out of beer and decided we'd stop and get some more. The dope house was only a few miles away. 10 minutes after picking me up, Pam double-parked on a side street and let me out. 6 inches of powder had blanketed the abandoned lot I trudged through, transforming the debris into something beautiful. When I reached the alley, I made a left and headed for the back stairs of a 3-story brownstone. I was on the first landing when from behind me a man's voice ordered me to stop. Seconds later, a hand rummaged through my coat pockets while another struggled to steady a gun. It vibrated against my temple. "Where's the money?" the man demanded. I don't have any." "Don't bullshit me." I told the robber I wasn't bullshitting him, that I was there only to see a friend. He pulled 4 envelopes from my back pocket, the mail I had grabbed before leaving my apartment lobby. He stuffed them inside his coat and backed away. I turned to leave. No, he said, motioning the gun up the stairs. "Go where you were going." I went to the 3rd floor. At apartment 6, I slipped a hand through the burglar bars to knock on the door. It opened before I touched it, just wide enough for me to see a sliver of Greg's dark brown face and his signature tan beret. "Hey, I was just robbed." "What?" "Yeah, right downstairs." We both laughed and shook our heads. "You're the second one today," he responded, handing me a gram of coke between the rusted wrought iron. For my inconvenience, he gave me another one at half price. I promised I'd pay him in 2 days. Back at the car, I told Pam about the gunman. "He didn't get the coke, did he?" she asked. "No," I told her. "He robbed me as I was going up the stairs. He was gone when I came down." "You a lucky motherfucker," she said, "'cause I'd have killed you for having me come out here for nothing." She knew what mattered. "Let's get some beer," I suggested. 30 minutes later, we were back at my apartment, and sometimes I imagined that as the first line of coke entered my body, the first bullet entered Greg's. I see our heads tilting back simultaneously, mine coming to a rest on my vinyl couch, Greg's on the snow-covered tenement stairs. I reach for Pam to rub her thigh as the gunman reaches for Greg to search his pockets. Pam rises and moves toward the bathroom, pausing to wink at me, and the gunman rises to run into the shadows, pausing to shoot Greg 5 more times. Greg is found with a .32 in his hand, unused, and Pam finds me with a can of beer in mine, unopened. Greg is dead. Pam is naked. I believe myself to be a lucky man. I know I am a minute later when I hear the news. Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. I think we need to take a minute to breathe after that reading. Hello, I'm Helen Atwan, the director of Beacon Press here in Boston and the administrator of the Hemingway Foundation PEN Awards since 2003. I've been lucky enough to be associated with PEN New England, a branch of PEN American Center, for more than a decade. These prizes are only a small part of what we do, though certainly one of the most important and happiest parts. PEN New England is a community of people who are passionate about great writing, great writers, and the free and open exchange of ideas. To be here today To recognize writers who have enriched our lives in such important ways is a joy and a privilege, and especially these two readings that we've just had the privilege of hearing. And so it's on behalf of PEN New England that I want to welcome you again, and once more to thank the judges of the Hemingway and the Winship, and to congratulate our winners and finalists. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. The first Hemingway Award was given in 1976, 35 years ago, and the seventh writer to receive the award in 1982 was Marilynne Robinson for her first novel, Housekeeping, the story of Ruth and her sister Lucille, who are cared for by a string of relatives and finally by their eccentric aunt after their mother commits suicide. They live in Fingerbone, a town set on a glacial lake where their grandfather died in a spectacular train wreck and their mother drove off a cliff to her death. It is a town, as the author writes, chastened by an outsized landscape and extravagant weather, and chastened again by an awareness that the whole of human history had occurred elsewhere. The book, as Leanne Schreiber described it in the New York Times Book Review, was so precise, so distilled, so beautiful that one didn't want to miss any pleasure it might yield. I remember distinctly my first reading of the novel, how it dazzled me with its complete command of my attention and emotions. I had just begun working at Farrar, Straus and Giroux when the news came that Housekeeping had won the PEN Hemingway. And I thought at the time, how wonderful for Marilynne Robinson that her stunning book would receive such an illustrious award. Today, I think she adds luster to the award. Marilynne relates that her editor, Pat Strong, and her agent had warned her that the book might not be reviewed, but it was. Leanne Schreiber's admiration was shared by virtually everyone who had a platform in literary criticism. After the Hemingway Housekeeping was named a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, the book became a classic, and Marilynne was hailed as one of the defining writers of our time. But it would be more than 20 years before she wrote another novel. In the interval, she devoted herself to nonfiction and teaching. Her essays and book reviews were widely published, and in 1989, Farrar Straus came out with Mother Country, Britain, the Welfare State, and Nuclear Pollution, a scathing examination of the environmental and public health dangers posed by the Sellafield nuclear reprocessing plant in England, a book I think we should all reread today. In 1998, Houghton Mifflin published a collection of her critical and theological writings, The Death of Adam, Essays on Modern Thought, which featured reassessments of such figures as Darwin, Calvin, and Nietzsche. And just last year, her Yale lectures became Absence of Mind, which is wonderfully described in this review from Maclean's magazine. One of the best thinkers in American letters, Robinson's new work is a slashing attack on scientific fundamentalism, not on behalf of religion, but of human consciousness and our traditional concept of mind. But nothing could wrap up this complex debate better than her reply to Jon Stewart in a Daily Show interview, when he asked, in considering this great conflict which is being framed as between science and religion, who's right? And she calmly responded, well, I am. And I believe she is. It was in 2004 that Marilynne returned to fiction with the novel Gilead, an intimate exploration of family and history. set in Iowa, where Marilyn has lived and taught for nearly 20 years. Gilead centers on John Ames, a 77-year-old pastor who is writing an account of his life and his family history as a legacy to his young son. Ames says at one point, "There are 1,000 reasons to live this life, every one of them sufficient." In telling his story, Marilyn exposes in exquisite detail the mundane as miraculous. That second novel won the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Critics Circle. In her third novel, Home, centers on Ames's friend, Reverend Robert Boughton, and his troubled son, Jack, who was a source of angst to Ames in Gilead. Asked why she returned to the same territory as the earlier novel, Marilyn said, "After I write a novel or a story, I miss the characters. I feel sort of bereaved." Her readers were very glad to return to Gilead, Iowa, to revisit these unforgettable, ordinary people. It is a mark of her genius that she wrote two highly successful novels set in this small Iowa town in the 1950s, both centering on ministers and without terrorists or mayhem, without cell phones or tweets, narrated slowly, meticulously, with almost painful insight, almost as Ron Charles noted in his DC Post review, almost too illuminating to bear. Writing in The Economist, critic Emily Bobrow observed, "Robinson's work is heavy with yearning, full of the beauties and sorrows of the everyday, and the odd existential glimpse of something much lighter or darker. That she is religious, contentedly and engagingly so, seeps into everything she writes." Standing next to Marilyn yesterday, I overheard many of her fans express their emotions about her books. Marilyn had observed in a comment earlier that afternoon that books can really change lives. Now her readers were lined up to tell her how her book had changed theirs. And I'd like to add, with deepest gratitude, my own. Please join me in welcoming Marilynne Robinson.
Well, thank you for a very, very lovely introduction. It really is wonderful to be here. I think that this is the only country in the world where when two writers meet, they say, "Where do you teach?" And I'm of course reminded, Gerald has just brought to mind the privilege it is to be able to teach, if we teach them, people of such intelligence, such high ambition as the ones who seek us out as student writers. The convention is we're teachers, they're students. But in fact, I think we develop together. I think that although I haven't written a great many books, the books that I have written are very much more considered and refined by virtue of the fact that I have had wonderfully talented young writers to talk with about them, to overhear in their conversations about what they read and what they write. It's been an amazing privilege. And frankly, I'm going to talk a little bit about how this compulsion to teach writing, to study writing, that is so well developed in this country and really pretty unique to this country, how I think that it is related to award ceremonies of this kind. For example, I remember when Housekeeping received this prize, the very great welcome that I felt to just have some sort of remote aspiration or some general sense of my own identity as writer, and then to feel that to know that there were people that are waiting to embrace that. That, you know, it's a wonderful thing. And I think that Hemingway himself is a part of this phenomenon. I remember, of course he is a part of every literary phenomenon in America, but I remember when I was young, and even when I was in college, there was sort of talk about how can there be an American literature, you know? And I think these were sort of, there was a heritage of bad old ideas that came from the 19th century and came from the earlier part of the 20th century that sort of encouraged the idea that if you're speaking what is essentially somebody else's language, you know, not autochthonous, we're all speaking our own version of English, that we are on a landscape that's not ours in some primordial sense and so on, that we would be inhibited from writing by the fact that this is true. And it's very bizarre. I remember hearing people when I was young saying, are you going to write the great American novel, you know, when there was already a very formidable accumulation of great American novels at that time. But I think that the problem of that was posed as how can you develop an American literature was something that writers like Hemingway and Gertrude Stein and others around him took very seriously and answered very fruitfully. I think that it is epitomized in Hemingway in the sense that he created an aesthetic that is an aesthetic of personal integrity. It is an aesthetic of tested language, tested thought, and individual testimony. The idea that if you are speaking truly from your own perception of truth, of the world, you are doing, there's an intrinsic beauty in that, an unassailable beauty, a beauty with no extra moving parts, no furbelows, a pure addition to the way in which people can hear language and understand experience. I think that this has had a profound impact on American letters precisely because it is a non-restrictive aesthetic. It invites every honestly held view, every new voice. And it understands every good voice as being a pure and undiluted addition to the sort of treasury we have of what there is to be known, what it means to be human, as they say. So the idea that requiring candor, not accommodation, not ornamentation, not acculturation even, but simply candor, that I think has been the most fruitful formula for creating a literature that could have been landed upon. And that Hemingway reified it, actualized it, realized it in his own prose in a way that makes it so that you can always return and always find that, that the discipline, the emotional depth combined with rigorous self-scrutiny that I think is the mark of, it is the core aesthetic of any writer, no matter what the other circumstances or subjects or valences that surround the writing might be. And because this aesthetic of integrity took hold as a core value in American literature, it has been able to enlarge itself and elaborate itself limitlessly. It means that a profound value can be given to every new voice if that voice is speaking truly. And of course, there is the, how do we know what is true? We know by the aesthetics of the voice that achieves it, you know. The attention that is paid to new writers is part, I think, of the understanding that we have that that there is a live literature, that we are seeing it move into new generations, say new things, enlarge the range of understanding that we can have. The question arises, you know, what is the effect of these prizes and so on? And I think that one of the things that we forget is that the universities notice these prizes. And we're not in the habit, I mean, those of us who live in universities and love them tend to nevertheless speak a little disparagingly about them because that's just what we do, right? But the fact is that there are a lot of people out there who are waiting to see what is the next book to read, what is the next book to teach. And that the winnowing that actually creates for us over a period of time a syllabus of interesting new writers, that syllabus is actually, you know, advanced by prizes and so on, and then realized in terms of teaching, in terms of aesthetic consideration and so on, in the universities, and who are, you know, bless their hearts, generally kind of scornful of the bestsellers and looking for the prizes to tell them where they should look. One of the things that is nice about, I mean, I think many things are fortunate about our situation, and again, there's a sort of prohibition against saying that. One of the things is that because we do tend to teach in universities, and because we travel around among universities, American cultural life is really very widely dispersed. So we not only have, you know, many voices coming in from many regions of the country, we have voices also going out into the country, you know. The fact that people who are students are very likely here to come into contact, if they want to, in one way or another, with an active writer, which is a very rare thing in the world, you know. We are not in Concord, we are not in Paris, we're everywhere. And I think that that's an enormous advantage and stimulus as far as American literature is concerned. I think that one of the most remarkable things about all this is that we are actually, as artists, encouraged, we might even say obliged, to teach our art. And that for that reason, we have the extraordinary privilege not only of, you know, encouraging people who should have encouragement, advising people who need advice, but also being continuously reminded again of what it is that moves people to write. The you know, splendors of youth, the anxieties, the impulses, the voracious curiosity and self-doubt and self-confidence and all the rest of it, that habit can make you forget when they cease to be your own state of mind, are continuously presented to you again in the new writers that are coming up. And the magic, the kind of indescribable, inexplicable strength and persistency of the impulse to tell, to say, I've seen the world represented in 1,000 ways, none of them satisfy me, I will represent it again, you know. The endlessness of that, the endlessly self-refreshing quality that it has, the expansive energy that it's given by the fact that we can meet together and talk together and think together. So I think that you know, American literature is a wonderful phenomenon. not simply in the fact that literature is a wonderful phenomenon, and I think that we've done a great deal to make it a living part in our national life, with all that it carries in terms of criticism, skepticism, alienation, whatever, every bitter truth that we don't want to know, we can probably find out from a novel. And we need that, and it's wonderful, and people seek it out, and people reflect on it, In any case, the aesthetic that Hemingway proposed, I think, and enacted is one that encourages us always to value new testimony, to revere a book even more than you revere a writer. I'm here to tell you, you can write one book and people will treat you like a writer for a long time afterwards, which is really nice. In any case, that's kind of what I want to say, that there's a great deal that works very beautifully in this country, I think, in terms of creating, enriching, making authentic and worthy its literary tradition. I think at the moment the publishing industry is sort of swamped by its own excesses. So many things are published that nobody knows where to look, etc., except with the help of prizes and so on. But I think that's a practical problem that does not mean decline in the culture. It means a sort of overexcitement of a certain kind, a healthy overexcitement. In any case, thank you very much, and it's so wonderful to be here, so wonderful to get credit for how wonderful Gerald Walker is. Okay.
Thank you, Marilyn Robinson, for those wonderful remarks, and to Brando Skyhorse and Gerald Walker for your memorable readings. The other day, my family and I were running a few minutes late to meet up with Carol and Patrick. We had just survived the ritualistic family argument about why teenagers shouldn't wear their sneakers with their dress-up clothes. And as we were running to the car, my 11-year-old daughter stopped. "Mom and Dad, you've got to come over here and see this." We were rushing. What could it be? I wanted to get in the car. "No," she said, "I'm serious. Come and look." How happy I was that we paused to see the delight in her eyes at the blossoming of the first crocuses in front of our house. And how pleased I am that all of you joined us here today to pause to listen to these fresh new voices and to hear from veteran writers with new testimony to share and stories to tell. I hope you'll all join us now for a reception in the pavilion where you can have your book signed and continue to appreciate the camaraderie of friends, colleagues, and fellow readers. Thank you all for coming.